It's time for another Drawing in the Dark. My name is Levi Smith. I draw and tattoo for a living, and today we're drawing M.O.D.O.K. Why M.O.D.O.K? He's by request, and still fits into my cartoonish villains phase here. I'll info dump his facts on screen as I start out with a very uninspired composition. I'm just gonna stick him in the middle, big ol' head with tiny limbs here. Full disclosure, this guy was not as easy as I assumed, especially wanting him to look cool. I just don't know. How do you make a potato look dynamic? I do use some reference off of Google and really muddled through this entire process, making it the most unique challenge so far. I didn't want to draw M.O.D.O.K, and that's my lesson for taking requests. But for the sketchbook and the video series, I'm determined to make this one work. Spending no time on the composition allowed me to get right into the face structure and the containment suit he rides in. Wears? Does he sit in this? Whatever. I do appreciate M.O.D.O.K as a villain trope in comic books. One thing that I loved about superhero comics were the bizarre over-the-top stories, fighting aliens, zombies, robot armies, giant demons, the ridiculous plots and thin characterizations, the two-dimensionality of it all. Realistic superheroes don't quite capture the fun of the old-school superhero adventure comic. Not to say that deep, meaningful, and profound stories shouldn't be made in comics form. Those are actually my favorite kind. But for the superhero genre, Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men, Justice League, all that stuff, are actually best served by recycling the formulas of old, like Batman versus Villain of the Week kind of stories. The ones without continuity, or even like a point in time that's relevant to anything before or after, the next adventure. I think what it is for me is that while a universal continuity in comic franchises like Spider-Man or Batman can be interesting, a kind of timeless classic treatment would be cool in addition to the soap opera long form of comic book continuity. But what do I know? I'm a Star Trek fan, new Trek and old. So M.O.D.O.K here fits into that campy, two-dimensional kind of adventure comic storytelling. Silly and emblematic of their nature, of an evil, grotesque, self-absorbed disregard for others, community, or even their own minions. The kind of minions that for some reason support these kinds of villains, even in the face of self-destruction. And as a kid, I thought that was fiction. Remember that through the process of drawing like this, and even with a pencil, to draw light at first, slowly getting darker as your drawing starts to take shape, at least with this kind of construction method, using basic shapes, mostly circles, to block out the form of the figure. Determining proportion, especially for a figure design like this, can take advantage of basic proportion rules for the limbs. As long as they're balanced, they will work for the purpose of intentionally being wrong or distorted. And with M.O.D.O.K, everything is wrong and distorted. M.O.D.O.K was created by Jack Kirby, which clearly explains the design motif behind him. And his name is definitely one of those acronyms created in reverse, deciding the name and then making up what each letter stands for. Mental organism designed only for killing. Oh. Appearing in 1959 in Tales of Suspense, those kinds of old school anthology comics packed with like superhero vignettes and other short stories are still some of my favorites in the realm of comic book storytelling. With little padding and stretching the storylines to get them to last longer or fill a whole comic, it was just a straightforward romp. Though I'm sure that the flaws of such formats are what led to other longer form treatments of characters and storylines, M.O.D.O.K seems well suited for those short, action-based, and context-free kind of bits found in anthology books before people wanted to know what happened next versus a next time kind of story progression. But I still think there is a place for that kind of Tales of Suspense format in modern comic storytelling. Not everything needs to be an ongoing soap opera for years and years. A complete story, beginning, middle, and end, would be nice a bit more often than it seems to be these days. In making these videos and coming up with these essay-like presentations has been an interesting practice on my part. They definitely make the process of making these videos longer and more difficult. But I do like it and want to add more to the video. But I'm not sure if I should just stick to the step-by-step narration of the drawing process, add trivia about the subject, or talk about other concepts and philosophy regarding drawing, storytelling, or keep it as I have been, doing a little bit of all three. One thing that I've wanted to include in these discussions is something like a handful of my favorite podcasts did in their heyday, as a few of those podcasts aren't in production any longer or flat out unavailable, such as Art and Story, which was an awesome discussion of comics, art, industry, and process that was so useful to me, as well as Webcomics Weekly and Webcomic Alliance, which are now defunct. All that's left now, it seems, is Comic Lab, which, don't get me wrong, is an A-list podcast for comic creators. But if there are any others you've heard of or follow, let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for more. So according to the analytics, people rarely even make it this far into the drawing videos. So my hope and goal is to come up with the second layer of content here that keeps people engaged, and even a two-tiered kind of presentation, one being the drawing process and the other the commentation on the process, and the experience of drawing and making comics. Part of it is for those who might want to be watching the drawing, and then other people that might just want something to listen to while they draw. The process for this M.O.D.O.K, as I suggested before, was more challenging than I expected, likely due to the unfamiliarity of the subject. I've never drawn M.O.D.O.K before. And my low level of excitement and interest, M.O.D.O.K isn't a character I find engaging or well presented, and as such, not interesting to me in a general sense. Though I can appreciate the nature and function of such a villain in comics, he's definitely a creative design, though one that I don't really connect with. I do think that ended up having an impact on how this drawing turned out. But as part of the sketchbook videos, I am determined to see it through, as changing directions at this point will leave me with no time to produce another video and leave an odd page in the sketchbook. So with all my excitement for drawing M.O.D.O.K, let's talk about the process. I do move quickly through the layout and composition and get right into working out details and environment elements to try and frame the character better. If I can't make him more dynamic, then I should at least make the scene itself a bit more interesting, and I'll do that by playing with the lighting and contrast of various forms. As I worked through his face, a strange likeness started to emerge that I was curious about, especially since it was completely unintentional. But this M.O.D.O.K is really starting to look like John Noble, the actor that played Denethor in Lord of the Rings, and more notably in my case, Walter Bishop in Fringe, one of my favorite shows ever and my favorite fictional mad scientist of all time. And while he's been in Star Trek and done voice work for more properties than you can shake a stick at, it is his work on Fringe that is the most indelible for me. I just can't get enough of that. And so that turned out to be a nice Easter egg in this process, seeing a favorite actor emerge in the art. And thinking about it, Noble would have made a powerful and compelling M.O.D.O.K in live action for me, and even without a good explanation about his presence in the Ant-Man movie, it still would have been a less contrived and silly treatment than what we ended up getting. But maybe that's just me. Perhaps if M.O.D.O.K hadn't been so cheesy, his megalomania would have been more threatening and campy, even if that was the intention. I add these scar lines in his upper lip and cheeks because they appear in one of the reference pictures that I'm using. But I have no clue as to what they represent or what they were in the reference. It just seems to be another design choice to either make him look more intimidating or more like a Marvel villain. I have noticed that versions of Thanos has had him as well. I do try to keep him from looking flat, by adding in some standard lighting from above and to the right, the viewer's right, which gives me something more to work up and play with in the piece itself. One thing I didn't put a lot of creativity into with this one is the tech of his chair suit thing. So much of what's in the reference seems to be like comic book greeble elements, just stuff stuck to the surfaces to imply a sense of tech, but no real logic applied. And while I'm sure that there's an explanation for the gem on his forehead, I didn't bother to learn it. But to me, villains like this that seem to just fill in the blanks between encounters with more compelling villains, such as Doctor Doom, Thanos, or Galactus, is that it prevents overusing the higher tiered villains, which makes them weaker and less compelling. It's kind of weird how that works. The more we see the villain in the comics, the more often they are defeated, and the thinner and weaker their motives become. How awesome would Doctor Doom be if he showed up every week, lost every week, and then had the same old motive every time? It gets lame, and then Doctor Doom becomes lame. But with such a compelling character as Doctor Doom, you really don't want him to end up that way. Especially one who also brings his own attention and fandom to the franchise. The desire to use him can be high, and then we get poor representations of him and his motives. Because when he isn't overused, he's misunderstood by those using him, like any other villain, and the threat of his presence diminishes. So bring out M.O.D.O.K or some other mid-level bad guy to fill in the gaps and establish a power contrast between the likes of him and these other villains like Doctor Doom, Red Skull, or Thanos. And while I have made it clear here how much M.O.D.O.K is not an inspiring or compelling villain to me, I do try to do the drawing here justice, and not just cheese out on it or just bang it out to get to the next project. I do try to show a full sketch process here. I try to pay attention to the elements in terms of contrast, clarity, detail, and presence in the scene, slowly building up shading values and facial details as I work this piece to a more completed stage. The thing about these kinds of characters and this kind of process, that the right thing to do would be to expand my study of the character, draw him another 10 times or so, and establish my own interpretation of him that was more fun to draw and more interesting to me. As part of the challenge here is my own lack of familiarity of the subject, as opposed to a character like Skeletor. There are a lot of representations in M.O.D.O.K that are more compelling and engaging than my version here, though not by much. He is a lump of a character by design. But a higher level of familiarity goes a long way in the ability to present the subject to a satisfying degree. And in the context of this drawing series and what I want to present, I should stick to characters that I do find more interesting. For the last third of this drawing, I really get into shading in parts of the background, building up contrast and weight to the piece overall. One particular mistake that I made early on that carries throughout the piece is his feet. I didn't give enough space on the page for his full feet, and particularly with characters that are flying, floating, or off the ground for whatever reason, it's important to not anchor the figure to any of the edges of the page. Having his feet touch the edge of the paper grounds him, and then we lose the sense that he's hovering off the ground. This trick or rule does a lot, especially for characters like Superman or Spider-Man as they are airborne, to have their entire figure visible in the frame without anchors. And I do spend a lot of time on this one, wondering if I had spent 2 more minutes thinking about how to compose the general layout of the elements in the beginning, I would have had a much better time with the piece overall. And maybe that's the primary lesson for me on this one. These videos tend to be a lot more work than it seems. The time behind them can be enormous, with an average 2-hour drawing time, then a couple of hours doing a video edit. After the video edit, I watch the video and develop a voiceover script, which can take 3 to 4 hours. Edit in the voiceover to the video, that takes a few more hours. And finally do a graphics pass, adding in the reference pics, floating titles, and other graphics like the title and end cards. Adding in the like and subscribe graphic, and altogether a single video can take about 10 to 14 hours for me to produce. I spread this across a few days as this isn't even a part of my regular workday. Then to get it out weekly, it can be a hell of a project to add to a regular job schedule. And while I'm sure that there is a better way to do this process, I haven't quite found it, or the familiarity with it yet to see how to improve. I'm just glad to be getting them out when I do. With a nice handful of videos made in 2024 and just getting back to making them for 2025, I don't even feel like I've made enough to figure out how to make them well, even to my own liking, to know what I should do to improve them. And if you've gotten this far, feel free to let me know in the comments what I could be doing more of or less of. I'm not promising I'll do it, but it'll give me an idea of how I can improve. I really crank up the time lapse for the background shading here. All of this heavy black done with a ballpoint pen is a sure recipe for carpal tunnel, if not a terrible way to fill in solid blacks. I really do recommend using a Sharpie or a brush to fill in large areas like this. And to speed things up, I went to 10 times normal speed to power through the shading here. If only it worked out like that in real life. To avoid too much stress on my hand and wrist, I do keep in mind a few concepts about how I use my tools. First, I don't hold my pen or pencil tightly, but just enough so that it doesn't slide through my fingers, and I don't press really hard with the pen into the paper either, even when I'm drawing or shading the darkest elements of a piece. And I'll take short, minute-long breaks while I'm working, as well as taking 5 to 10 minute breaks every hour or so, all to maintain hand strength and control, and especially to limit the repetitive motion stress in my wrist. These methods of hand care have worked well for me over a nearly 30-year career of drawing, and most of it comes down to how much pressure you're using to hold your pen and apply to your surface. Aside from that, I do hold my pen the same way as I write, and that just feels more comfortable and controlled for me, so I've stuck with it. I do like the effect of the background shading on this piece though, and how it's added depth and interest to it overall, which is nice because it took a while to do here. One thing I do have to contend with in making these videos is the idea that perfect is the enemy of good, in that if I were to work towards a concept of perfect or the absolute best I could do, then not only would it take forever to produce a video at all, the work behind it would be enormous, with dozens of practice sketches before each drawing, hours spent studying the editing software instead of learning what I need as I need it, and even looking for commissioning background music. I did try to commission some background music, but that didn't work out. To more involved editing, camera, audio, setups, and concerns that while I hope to evolve into, I can't allow to become barriers to producing a video at all. And with things at such a low level audience-wise, I do have the room and freedom to grow and learn, hopefully building a following as I build the needed skill sets and experience to make better videos. And it kind of justifies itself along the way. As it is, I'm still getting used to the idea of presenting all of this as a video as much as making the videos themselves. But that's it for us here today. A very fine and passable rendition of M.O.D.O.K from Marvel Comics. I don't think it turned out too bad at all, actually. I just didn't have as much fun with this one as I have had with others. Thank you for stopping by. Give it a like and a subscribe if you like this kind of content and want to see more. We're both using this algorithm here after all. Don't forget to check out the links in the description for other socials and merch. Find me on Patreon as well for behind the scenes content and a more personal perspective on making art and content like this in these exciting times. See you next time.